My name is Trish Roberts and you're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Today I just wanted to briefly talk about Bernie Sanders, Senator Bernie Sanders, the senator from Vermont in the United States. So today I was looking online and I saw something posted by the Real News Network about Senator Sanders and how he was speaking out about the Saudi U.S. Saudi-backed genocide in Yemen, and I don't recall seeing him ever speak out about this before, and it's been going on now. This U.S. Saudi-backed, Saudi campaign of genocide, really, against Yemenis. Yemen is one of the poorest countries in the Middle East, and I sort of made a remark on this social media page. You know, what took him so long? I mean, there's one child dying every 10 minutes from famine and from cholera, etc. I mean, it's a disaster, and you don't hear about it at all in the mainstream media, which is appalling, really. And so I often hear from people who call themselves progressive, it doesn't seem to matter what Bernie Sanders does, how much of an imperialist he is, which he is, and I will read some of the things that Senator Sanders has supported to demonstrate. It's from a Facebook page, which is it's called Bernie Barry Bush. It sort of demonstrates pretty clearly that he is an imperialist and an interventionist, and he speaks out of both sides of his mouth. He's speaking out about this dreadful genocide in Yemen. He doesn't call it a genocide, but it's been going on for a couple of years now, I think, or almost that. It's been going on for a long time. So why has it taken him so long? And I mean, now it's just desperate. I'll read out, and this goes up to 2015. Probably doesn't indicate all the things that he's been in favor of, but I'll mention a few things since then that he's done as well. I mean, I don't understand why anybody who calls themselves a progressive would consider that he's anything but an imperialist, and he's far from being a progressive. You cannot be for intervention and for imperialism, and you can't be throwing Palestinians under the bus as he has done when he signed that letter with 100 senators a few months ago, asking the UN to stop criticizing Israel, something like that. I mean, you can't be all of that. You can't be dangling healthcare in front of people and then backing something that's less than universal healthcare, and then, you know, talking about it. I mean, he's all over the place. So, you know, he may have started people thinking with his campaign and thinking about what's wrong with things, and that's very good. But he's just been, quote unquote, sheepdogging for the for the DNC and the Democratic Party now for ages. You know, he keeps having people think that the Democratic Party has progressive leanings or something. I mean, that's what the Democratic Party, the DNC, do. They get people like Kamala Harris to say all the right things, mouth all the right words, to talk about healthcare as a right for people, and yet she knows darn well that bill is never going to pass, the healthcare thing. So she's just another one now whom the DNC is going to prop up for the 2020 election. You know, she's obviously their selection, Kamala Harris, and they're not even going to, they don't even pretend that they care about what the public think about in the primaries. They've stated in that DNC lawsuit that they, you know, they pick who they want to be as their leader in the back rooms while they're smoking cigars. Literally, that's what they said. So they basically take money from people or whatever. The people are wasting their money and their time, doing anything with the DNC. They're just corporate-loving warmongers. There's very little difference between the DNC and the GOP. So I don't know why anybody would think, and why Senator Sanders continues to quote-unquote sheepdog for them by going on unity tours with Tom Perez. You know, that's what he does. And I don't know why people keep talking about him and calling him Bernie. Why do people keep calling him Bernie, for goodness sake? He's not our friend. He's no one's friend. He's a politician, and he's certainly not anybody's friend. For one, he had Dr. Stephanie Kelton as his economic advisor. He knows about how the financial system works. He knows about modern monetary theory, and yet he continues to sort of, not talk about it, openly. And and I invite you to check out what that is, and I'll leave some links to that. That's a very important issue. It's really just simply, I'm far from anybody who should be trying to explain it, but I mean, Congress holds the purse strings. Federal taxes don't fund spending. Congress holds the purse strings, and that's why they never have any problem, Congress, in immediately having enough money to fund the military. Do you notice they never have any problem funding any sort of military interventionism all over the world? Like the recent, I think it was $700 billion that Kamala Harris and all those other ones that people keep thinking are all the people. I don't even know. I think he might have even added his name to that, Sanders. But anyway, there's just this endless amount of money anyway for war. So Congress holds the purse strings, and that's why they can immediately find money for the military and war. But then they hum and ha when it comes to healthcare for all. Just think about that for a moment. Anyway, that's what that's why modern monetary theory is so important to learn about that. And I urge people strongly to check that out, because once you understand that Congress could fund all these things like free health care and free education, etc., and there could be a federal job guarantee if you want it, and all of that sort of thing. They could fix all the infrastructure. They just choose not to, even though they hold the purse strings. The US literally can't go broke. It's not tied to the gold standard at all, and hasn't been since 1971, and that's why it's important for people to learn, for the public to learn about modern monetary theory, because once you realize what's truly going on economically, you'll be outraged and you'll hold any representatives in Congress accountable. So anyway, that's getting sidetracked, because but I just want you to know that Dr. Stephanie Kelton was his economic advisor, and she's a great proponent of MMT, modern monetary theory. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through some of the imperialist endorsements, interventionist endorsements that Bernie Sanders has done in recent years. And this is so, people need to put to rest that he's any kind of progressive and just stop talking about him as if he's some sort of friend. He is not. So this is from the Bernie Barry Bush page, and it's all stuff you can find out yourself. You can look it up. It's freely available to look this up. So Bernie Sanders supporters should really take the time to examine his foreign policy record before making assumptions about it. He's not anti-war and he's not non-interventionists. And he doesn't, quote-unquote, support the troops. So here's some things that he voted for. He voted in favor of H.R. 3107, Iran and Libya Sanctions Act of 1996, which, quote, imposes sanctions on persons exporting certain goods or technology that would enhance Iran's ability to explore, for, extract, refine, or transport by pipeline petroleum resources and for other purposes, end quote. In 1997, Bernie Sanders voted for H.R. 2159, which is Foreign Operations FYN 8 Appropriations Bill, which included $3 billion for Israel, including $1.8 billion in military assistance and $1.2 billion in economic assistance, $2.12 billion for Egypt, including $1.3 billion in military assistance, and $815 million in economic assistance, $770 million for former Soviet republics, and $212 million for international narcotics control and law enforcement. He also voted for H.R. 4059 Military Construction 5Y99 Appropriations Bill, which provided $2.82 billion for general military construction. Now see how easily the money for the military is just like that. Just like that, no trouble whatsoever. Please look up modern monetary theory to find out why that is. You'll be outraged and you'll be wanting to do something about it. Okay, so in 1998, Bernie's name was included as a YEA vote on H.R. 4655, the Iraqi Liberation Act of 1998, which expressed the sense of Congress that it should be the arm of the United States to remove Saddam Hussein from power. So, you know, even though he may, I don't know if he was, I think he might have said he was against the Iraq War, but I mean, he's already was looking at that in 1998. He was already kind of leaning that way and set the scene for that later on. So President George W. Bush later used the Iraqi Liberation Act to provide justification for military action for the 2003 invasion. So in hold on a sec. I've lost my place just temporary. Okay. In 1999, Bernie Sanders voted for H.R. 2465, which provided $4 billion for military construction, and he voted for H.R. 3196, which provided $2.16 billion for military and economic assistance to Israel, $760 million for military and economic assistance to Egypt, $535 million for Eastern European and the Baltic states, including $150 million for assistance to Kosovo, $300 million for military and economic assistance to Jordan, and $285 million for international narcotics control. So that was 1999. And then, and somebody says here, Ron Jacobs from Counterpunch from the 31st of March 2003 said, quote, "For those of us who, with a memory longer than the average US news reporter, we can remember Bernie's staunch support for Clinton's 100-day bombing of Yugoslavia and Kosovo in 1999. I served as a support person for a dozen or so Vermonters who sat in his Burlington office a couple of weeks into the war. Not only did Senator Sanders refuse to talk with us via telephone, unlike his Vermont counterparts in the Senate, Leahy and Jeffords, Sanders had his staff call the local police to arrest those who refused to leave until Sanders spoke with them. The following week, Sanders held a town hall meeting in Montpelier, Vermont, where he surrounded himself with sympathetic war supporters and one university professor who opposed the war and Sanders' support for it. During the question and answer part of the meeting, Sanders yelled at two of the audience's most vocal opponents to his position and told them to leave if they didn't like what he had to say. So anyway, so in 2001, that's end quote. In 2001, Bernie Sanders supported H.R. 1954, which extended the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act of 1996. Following the 9/11 attacks, Sanders voted in favor of H.R. Resolution 64, authorization for use of military force, which allowed President Bush to use the United States Armed Forces against anyone involved with 9/11 and any nation that harbors these individuals. In 2002, Bernie Sanders voted against H.J. Resolution 114, which authorized President Bush to use military force against Iraq. However, he would continue to support the bloated military defense bills that would ultimately be used to sustain the war he allegedly disagreed with. In 2003, Sanders supported H.R. 5010, which provided $355.1 billion in appropriations for the Defense Department for the fiscal year of 2003, an increase of $37.5 billion from 2002, as well as $71.6 billion for procurement of aircraft, missiles, weapons, combat vehicles, and shipbuilding, $7.4 billion for ballistic missile defense, and $58.4 million for foreign aid, which includes humanitarian assistance, foreign disaster relief, and demining programs. Sanders also voted in favor of H.R. 2800, Foreign Operations Appropriation FY 2004 bill, which granted $1.8 billion in military and economic assistance to Egypt and $2.2 billion for Israel military assistance. In 2004, Bernie Sanders supported H.R. 4613, which allocated $25 billion for emergency defense spending for operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, and $77.4 billion for procurement of new weapons. In 2005, Sanders supported H.R. 2863, Defense Department FY 2006 Appropriations Bill, which supported $50 billion for ongoing operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. In 2006, Sanders voted for H.R. 5631, which provided $70 billion for ongoing operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. In 2007, Sanders supported H.R. 1585, National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2008, which granted $187.14 billion for Iraq and Afghanistan operations. Now, the NDAA is actually a notorious act, and you should look into that, the National Defense Authorization Act. In 2009, Sanders voted in favor of H.R. 2647, which authorized $309 million for research and evaluation, procurement, and deployment of an alternative missile defense system in Europe, and also allowed the Secretary of Defense to increase the active duty number for the U.S. Army to a number greater than otherwise allowed by law, up to the 2010 baseline plus 30,000 troops. During the same year, he called closing the torturous gulag of Guantanamo a, quote, complicated, end quote, a complicated issue, end quote, and ultimately rejected a proposal to shut it down. See, I mean, you know, that was 2009. I mean, that's a hellhole. You know what I'm saying? It's a hellhole. Why wouldn't he want it shut down? And I won't go into that, but I mean, anyway. In 2011, we're coming to the end of this, so bear with me, but it needs to be laid out for people. So somebody's done the work in checking out these particular interventionist type things he supported, bills he supported for the military and for Israel, and this is what people need to understand. Those who call themselves progressive need to understand he's completely, up to his neck in military stuff, and war interventionist stuff. So in 2011, Sanders co-sponsored Resolution 85, which urged the UN Security Council to take action to protect civilians in Libya from attack, including the possible imposition of a no-fly zone over Libyan territory. Well, we all know what happened to Libya. It's completely destroyed. Libya made the mistake of handing over its nuclear weapons, and look what happened to it. That's why DPRK won't do that, because they've seen what's happened to Iraq and Libya. So anyway, in 2014, Bernie Sanders came out in favor of levying economic sanctions and act of war against Russia. The entire world has got to stand up to Putin, he said. We've got to deal with sanctions, end quote. That same year, Sanders didn't object to having his name included by unanimous consent in S-498, which backed Israel's brutal summer-long military assault against Gaza. Now, that assault against Gaza killed 550 children, 550 plus children in 2 weeks. Israel's brutal apartheid state, and its ongoing campaign of genocide against Palestinians. He just, he backed that particular brutal summer-long military assault against Gazans in that open-air prison where they can't go anywhere. And there was, a lot of adults killed, but 550 plus children were killed in that. So he backs, he's totally in support of the US backing of Israel's apartheid regime, an apartheid system that is way worse than anything at the height of the South African apartheid system. It's way worse than that. So, and like I said, recently he threw Palestinians under the bus in a few months ago by signing that bill with 100 other senators urging the UN to stop criticizing Israel, for goodness sake. So he just threw Palestinians under the bus. He can't maintain any sort of position. He speaks out of both sides of his mouth. Sometimes, there was one point where he was for Palestinians, and now he just went back to whatever was convenient at the time. That's no progressive. I'm sorry. It's just a typical politician speaking out of both sides of their mouth. So anyway, and he's, speaking of that that action against that economic sanctions against Russia in 2014. I mean, he's been he's been putting out anti-Russian propaganda for ages now. He's literally done videos about it, even though there's no proof whatsoever really that Russia interfered with that election. That was just a big, quote-unquote, red herring, because Hillary Clinton was her campaign was trying to distract from those Podesta emails where, all the WikiLeaks Podesta emails that came out about her and her campaign. That's what this whole most of what this Russiagate thing is. And he would know that. William Binney said from the NSA, you know, I think he said they could easily find out who did that. It's a leak, it wasn't a hack. And the veteran intelligence professionals for sanity sort of stated that it was a leak, not a hack. It was somebody within the United States on the East Coast that actually leaked that information. It wasn't a hack. It wasn't a Russian hack. So anybody who does any sort of research at all can find that out. But despite that, Sanders has been promoting anti-Russian propaganda, and how dangerous is that? Because that could lead to World War III, and it'll be all over for all of us. So what kind of quote-unquote progressive is that? I mean, seriously. I'm just astounded that people who call themselves progressive still talk about that man as if he's something special. I mean, he's a politician. He might have started a dialogue. He might have opened up a dialogue for for some U.S. citizens, which is a good thing. But that's about all. And it's time for people to let him go. He's trying to save that awful corporate warmongering party, the DNC, and people should exit and never ever look back. People should be voting third parties, and just give those two major parties a massive, wide berth, because they are not your friend. They are for themselves. They are for corporations. They should be wearing little logos on their coats in Congress, Raytheon and Exxon, and all the different corporations. Excuse me, scratching. It's spring here, and the pollen is out in crazy amounts, and it's been a bit difficult for me. So my sinuses, etc. So please excuse me if I look like I've got fleas. Anyway, I'll continue on with this. And so where were we up to here now? The last one I read was about, supporting that brutal military assault against Gaza by the Israel, the incredibly white supremacist Israeli government who's trying to wipe out Palestinians. Anyway, so most recently he vowed to continue Obama's murderous international drone war. That was not most recently. This is at least a year old, this post. But so Sanders vowed to continue Obama's murderous drone war. Sanders also supports funneling weapons into Iraq to fight ISIS, as well as airstrikes. And he continues to spread the myth that Iran seeks to build nuclear weapons. Excuse me. Well, Iran actually would be foolish not to continue its nuclear program, because Iran can certainly see what's happened to Libya and Iraq, and what would definitely happen to DPRK, North Korea, if North Korea gave up its nuclear weapons. Any country that has nuclear weapons and isn't submitting to U.S. empire and doing whatever they say, they'd be very, very foolish to give up their nuclear weapons. So, but the ultimate aim of U.S. empire is to invade Iran. The neocons, one neocon, Bill Kristol on Twitter, actually said Iran is the prize. So that's how sort of, sorry to use this word, but insane these people are. And if they attack Iran, I'm sure that Russia and probably China will. The same with DPRK. Russia and China have said, or rather China has said, it will not stand by if DPRK is attacked. So, that would lead to probably World War III. And if all this saber rattling continues, the United States constantly doing these war exercises around DPRK and all of that, which they've been doing for a long time now, you know, something terrible could happen. So, you know, so anyway, all this information, you know, is publicly available, what I've read out here, and I found it on, I'll leave a link to the site that I found it from. And, you know, people should think, well, obviously this man is far from any sort of progressive, and, you know, and he's, you know, just trying to keep people or coming back to that awful war corporate party of oligarchs that don't care one iota about any US citizen at all. So how many people have to be killed for, you know, people to sort of think, you know, this man Sanders is not what people, you know, think he is. So anyway, you know, he's been, and since this has been written, you know, he's been, you know, quote unquote sheepdogging for the DNC. He's been promoting anti-Russian propaganda, as I said, which could lead to World War III. He's thrown Palestinians under the bus by signing that bill with those 100 other senators. He's for intervention in Syria, and the United States. There's actually a bill that Tulsi Gabbard introduced into the Congress, which would make it illegal for the US to fund terrorist groups like ISIS. Imagine that. It hasn't even caused a ripple anywhere. And Tulsi Gabbard also is an interventionist in a way. She speaks out of both sides of her mouth as well. But to have to introduce a bill for the US to stop supporting terrorists, and it doesn't even make the mainstream media. And here they are accusing all these other countries of supporting terrorists when they've literally got a bill that's supposed to make it illegal. So anyway, I think that's about all I had to say here. Oh, and he's been vilifying DPRK with the best of them, and I think he was supportive of the sanctions against that. But anyway, you know, there's ample evidence that he's an interventionist and an imperialist. And by the way, you know, he didn't call out the DNC when they actually, there was election fraud, and he actually won the primary, and they just ignored it, and he didn't call them out. Sanders, he didn't call them out, and people that couldn't, there was a lot of people that gave him $27 or gave him a lot of donations multiple times that couldn't afford to do it. And I don't know, he got like, I think it was, hundreds of millions of dollars. Was it $270 million or something? And then when it was very clear that they had robbed him of that primary thing with election fraud, the DNC, he never called them out. There was a number of people urged him to do so, and he just refused to take calls even. So he refused to call out the DNC, and he continues to refuse to call them out, but he took all that money from those people. I mean, what kind of person does that? That's not an honest thing to do. And he ended up paying the DNC $100,000 for the privileged, quote-unquote, privilege of going around with Tom Perez, a corporatist, doing a unity tour, quote, unity, end quote, tour, for the DNC. I mean, people need to wake up. He's, you know, he speaks out of both sides of his mouth when it's convenient. He's a typical politician, and he's an imperialist. And that's really, I just can't believe it when I see people sort of talking, saying, Bernie this and Bernie that. Isn't Bernie great? And draft Bernie for, you know, the draft Bernie party. Draft Bernie for a People's Party and all this sort of stuff. Why on earth would anybody want him to lead a party. If he had won, say if he ended up becoming president, it probably would have been a disaster anyway, because he is an interventionist. He had no trouble with the drone program, assassinating people from the sky. He has no problem with that. I mean, that's outrageous, just assassinating people. And drones, they double tap things. They double tap wedding parties. They've killed people in wedding parties, and then the people that go along to help the wounded end up being killed. They do another strike after people go to help those people. I mean, you've seen that collateral damage video where that Chelsea Manning went to prison for 35 years. She's out, thank goodness, but that was, that's a regular occurrence, and even though that's not a drone thing, but I mean, they were just assassinating civilians from the air and thought it was, and were making jokes about it. I mean, if you've watched my video, my interview with Dr. Dalia Wasfi, where we were talking about Iraq, and I invite you to check that out. I mentioned that there was a veteran, Iraq veteran. His last name is Howard, and he talked about, how they would just, if somebody in the streets of Iraq was firing on them, like with a rifle or something, they'd have orders to just kill everybody in the area. It's like a collective punishment thing. He talked about how one of his tank commanders, apparently there was a bus with women and children in it, and they were apparently waving white flags out the bus window. And the tank commander later on, this veteran, his last name Howard, said that he went by this bus. It was a blown up bus with bodies of women and children outside the bus, and he found out that the tank commander had blown up the bus because he was bored and he wanted to find something to shoot at. And this is in Iraq, and this is not uncommon. He said it had nothing. I've realized very quickly it had nothing to do with liberating people. They had, they couldn't care less about the civilian population, and we can find that out also clearly by the use of the U.S. military using depleted uranium munitions, because that vaporizes and leaves radioactive particles everywhere, including in the food and in the water. And now there's terrible deformities of children. There's cancer, bone cancers, and all sorts of different cancers. It's a kind of and they don't even need to use depleted uranium as an armor-piercing sort of a substance, because they could use tungsten, but they're getting rid of uranium because it's free. They're getting rid of this depleted uranium because there's lots of it from the Soviet Cold War, and they're using Iraq as a dumping ground for depleted uranium, and that's how they get rid of it. And there's not even any tanks to be using it on to pierce armor, so they don't even need to use it, but they do. So these are all the awful things. Anyway, that's another story about Iraq, but I invite you to check that out that I did with Dalia Wasfi, from a couple of weeks ago. It's September 2017 right now. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out about Senator Sanders, because seriously, people have to just move on and let him go. It's great that he started a sort of a dialogue about certain things, but that's all he's done really, and now he's quite dangerous, and he's leading people back to that awful party. And they always use these sort of people as carrots. The DNC use people that look like they're progressive as carrots to keep people in with them, to keep people thinking that they're some sort of progressive party when they're not. They're so far from that. They're no friend of the public's. They're warmongers. They're dangerous, and he's helping keep people wedded to that party. And he's been doing that for a long time now. I don't know why he just doesn't join that party and be done with it. He said, you know, he's no independent. I mean, what independent goes and has so much influence, you know, keeps trying to keep people in the Democratic Party? I don't know. So anyway, please consider that for those of you who think that Senator Sanders is heaven on a stick, and, you know, I mean, he's not. And if you don't care about that body count of all those interventions, including that dreadful situation of Israel in the summer of 2014, and 550 children killed in 2 weeks, and lots of adults, hundreds and hundreds of adults killed. If you don't care about that, then you need to ask yourself why. Why do you not care about all these brown people overseas that are being murdered by the millions for these wars of choice, of hegemony, for hegemony and resources? And Sanders is a part of that war machine. So anyway, that's really all I wanted to say. I hope it wasn't too tedious listening to all those bills being read out, but you can look them up. I'll put a link to that particular Facebook page site where somebody did all the effort of putting that together. And please consider just forgetting about these two main US war corporate parties and start supporting real socialist or real candidates that actually are for the people and care about the people and are not interventionists. Okay, well, thanks very much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Till next time, bye for now.